Okay. It is 6:07. This is a meeting of the City of Grandview Heights City Council Planning Administration Committee. I am the chair of this committee, Rebecca Hotspotinos, and Ed Hasty. Ed, are you on? Can you just say yes to make sure that you can hear me? Councilmember Hasty, are you here? I will take that as a no. So I guess we will have to wait and see if Councilmember Edwards can get in. Otherwise, we don't even have a quorum to have a meeting. As much as I like myself, I cannot constitute the entire meeting. I am sending a text message to Councilmember Hasty as well. There's Ryan. Councilmember Edwards, let us know if you can hear us. I see your name on the board, but no video. Mr. Hasty or Mr. Edwards, let us know if you can hear us.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have one item on the agenda for this evening, and I have to try to toggle to the other screen. Is ordinance 2021-04. This is the rezoning of the property located at 777 Goodale Boulevard. This is to switch it from light industrial to the Grandview Yard commercial use. This is on its third reading. Mayor Kearns or Director Kelker, does anyone have anything that is pertinent to discussion? Director Kazam?
This is, it's an island in the middle of GCMXD. It is a rezoning that is really incidental to a matter, conditional use matter pending for the Planning Commission, and would bring the zoning, underlying zoning into line with the surrounding area, generally leading to better outcomes and better potential for further economic development down the road. Anything to add? I would defer to Director Kelker.
Yeah, that all true. Yeah, this zoning in this spot is definitely something that stands out as not fitting anymore. It's been rezoned all the way around it. Definitely an island as far as zoning is concerned. And one of the interesting things that led to this, I would say, is that as we've had projects come in, the review standards haven't really made sense to be reviewing it under M for manufacturing, because the outcome that you want is actually aligned with the GCMXD district standards. And so as a result really of an opportunity to get the landowner's attention to facilitate the rezoning, we piggybacked kind of onto one of the requests and use this as an opportunity to effectuate this rezoning, which is really to the benefit of the city. We would definitely recommend approval.
Great. Do any of the committee members have any questions or items they wish to discuss?
Sorry, this is Brian. I had to take my video off. I have no concerns. I'm supportive of this recommendation from the administration.
Excellent. I also am in favor of recommending approval of this item. So as long as there is no other discussion needed, I move to recommend approval in the general meeting, and we can adjourn this one and get on to rules and productivity if we have time to do that at 6:13. Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, we'll adjourn this. And so, Brian, we don't need I call the rules and productivity meeting to order. We got through, I think, all the way through Rule 4 the last time. And again, just to reiterate, my intent for these first few rules meetings is to kind of just generally go over the rules, and we'll get through as many as we can, leaving enough time to transition over to the general council meeting at 7. And this is just to get sort of an idea of the things that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, of which are definitely need to be changed. The last meeting, we discovered that there could be a lot of improvement in the process regarding Rule 4 and how president of council is elected, and maybe even committee members. And so we're not discussing those details yet, but kind of just putting some pins in the things that kind of stick out. Yes, Director Sam.
I just wanted to mention, after the last meeting, the clerk was kind enough to gather some information from other communities, which is at the top of the agenda or the packet. I just wanted to call out the fact that one thing that's not delineated there is the cities that are charter cities and the cities that are strong mayor, city manager forms of government. So that may explain some of the sort of mishmash data. And so just to kind of recap a little bit, a lot of cities that have a strong or a city manager form of government will have 7 members of council, from among which the mayor is selected, who may in effect serve, in the same capacity as the president of our council. It's not consistent across the board. All of these home rule towns, have a lot of discretion to run themselves any way they see fit. But I just wanted to make clear that that's not one of the delineated factors in this list.
Thank you. Does anybody want to continue discussion that we had on Rule 4 and that kind of process before we move on to Rule 5, committees of council? And try to say something, because I have a tiny little MacBook and I have multiple windows open, so I don't necessarily see your face. You might be covered up by the agenda. So if you want to say something, please say something, would be helpful. I have some ideas about committees, not so much of the composition of the committees or what the committees are, what they are called, but on the responsibilities of the chair. And some of us have had some discussions about this unofficially, but it does say that the chair keep the meeting minutes, and they're supposed to, it doesn't say exactly when you're supposed to turn them in, just a reasonable time. I really would like to explore, and of course, this discussion includes Leilani, our city council clerk, but I would like to explore the possibility of having city council's clerk, if her job description allows for that, especially if she's going to be present in the meetings anyhow, taking the minutes for us. It's difficult enough as it is when you have in-person meetings to be running the meeting and still trying to take minutes for it. It's been especially highlighted during the pandemic when we're trying to do Zoom meetings. And I know I, for one, have done an absolutely abysmal job of taking minutes and turning them in. You're fielding several different windows in a screen and trying to like communicate with other people. So I think that would be really beneficial if it's something that works for the city and works for her job description, works within budget. But that is, I think, a really important issue that I would really like to look into if I have support from other committee members on that. I'd love to hear from President Keeler about that, and anybody else that has anything to say.
Sure, I definitely think that that is something that could be explored. In the past, we've had certain folks who either it might be a couple months until the minutes came out, or there were no minutes taken at all. And not only does that not help you move legislation forward, but I think it also does a disservice to any community members or other folks who want to kind of know how things are going. It's not very transparent. Right now, the meetings are being recorded for committee meetings, but previously, before the pandemic, they were not. So I think in an effort of transparency, putting more structure around what those minutes look like and how fast they get out, and having a discussion on how they're taken should all be part of that conversation.
Thanks. Anyone else have discussion on that particular item or anything else about Rule 5 in general? I'm looking. I see nothing.
I don't have anything specific that's different than what you've been mentioning, but I do support the further discussion, to say the least, of having a more consistent and framework minutes for the committees. But again, I think the discussion part of that is whether or not we can handle that within the clerk's view and not create a additional burden. And generally speaking, as we all know, and many members of the public know, the committee meetings are typically a lot more casual, they're more brief than the full meeting, but that's not always the case. So I think having the flexibility to be able to reflect that, you know, in a very simple way, there was one item of business, it was housekeeping, and here's how it played out. Or, hey, it was an hour-long meeting with robust discussion. And right now, with the chairs doing that, it's not, I don't think it's expected to be exhaustive minutes, but it's certainly not sufficient for some of those longer meetings.
If I may, as a non-council member, we are at the city making many efforts to handle the information age. And I think we can anticipate when we go back in session in person that we will have, better capacity to video record all meetings. And we'll be doing that. And in the past, we really were only doing council meetings, not committee meetings, not planning, zoning meetings. And so if that factors into your analysis, I think that does give more transparency. And, I certainly support professional minute taking. I think there's a lot more consistency that we would be seeing, and all kinds of other benefits. But I just wanted to mention the video aspect of this.
That will certainly be helpful, even if, it remains that chairs are still taking their own minutes. At least then we would have the video to access to go back and look at when it's difficult to kind of do simultaneously.
I would just add
Um,
one thing to that. I know YouTube does a very rough transcript of videos that are posted there, and that's where we put our videos. But I think in the spirit of equality and access, and folks who might have a harder time with video, making sure the minutes are reflective of that. So I would just add that.
I agree with that. I'm not advocating for video in lieu of minutes, but just a process improvement, even if it is something as simple as a template like we have for legislation that, you know, you can at least have by your side when you're running your committee meeting, and kind of a guide for you to write things in and help remember. Just kind of spitballing there. 6, voting. Unless Director Kuzam has anything to say, I don't know that there's much you can change with voting. That's sort of the sort of thing that seems the way it is.
You know, I think the only thing that we talked about here was whether this council wants to continue the process of 3 readings. That's not, you know, a requirement that it must adhere to. A lot of times we have, you know, like you said, housekeeping matters, and maybe we can designate those in some manner on the cover sheet with an H or something, so that those don't require 3 readings in order to get taken care of. And the other thing to point out there is that the rule currently says that ordinances and resolutions shall be read 3 times unless suspended. It's been the practice in Grandview, certainly long before I came to Grandview as a city attorney, that resolutions were not required to be read 3 times. And Anthony is also shaking his head yes. But they were routinely read once unless otherwise requested. So this might just be a point for clarification. So if we want to continue what's been the practice in actuality of, you know, reading resolutions 1 time rather than 3, because resolutions, as distinguished from ordinances, don't make law. They really just are precatory statements in support of something. That might be a good place to clean up.
Thank you. I'm taking notes so I can have minutes. Is this where we would talk about committee as a whole versus there's another way to do it where you can do voting in a different way? And my apologies, I'm not super clear on the difference of those processes, but I know that this was discussed at some point that there are ways to do the agenda or agenda as a whole or
The
something.
consent agenda, I
Yeah.
think, is what you might be referring to.
That is.
So, yeah, some towns, and Marble Cliff would be a good example, a number of sort of standard housekeeping items, reading of the minutes, any finance report, things of that nature are generally done as a consent agenda, meaning that the council will have read them in advance and is just adopting them with a yes vote and moving on, so as not to have to read through all of those. So that's simply a preference. I don't have any recommendation one way or the other. It's just a matter of what you'd like to do. And I think Ms. Keeler has probably had some experience either watching Columbus meetings or UA meetings or other people's meetings. They have a thought
If
on that.
I could add something there, I know that Columbus does the consent agenda, but a lot of their legislation is very kind of minute detail. Like they'll have legislation for you know, funding for paving Calumet for 2 blocks, and they would be there, you know, all night at a council meeting if they did not do their consent agenda as opposed to the way we do things. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, I think a consent agenda for some items perhaps might make sense. For those housekeeping things right now, those are the ones that I don't assign to committees because a 5-minute committee hearing for everyone to show up, say, yeah, we all like this, and then dismiss is can be done in a regular council meeting without having the extra setup for our IT department and the council members and everyone else who has to be at those. So I can find value in somehow working with routine things in a quicker way. I think exploring what that would look like, and if it's the cost benefit analysis of moving to that would be worth looking into.
Excellent. Anything else on Rule 6?
I have a quick clarification question. Item A, I don't know if there's anyone else in the meeting that would comment on this, but I've never seen this exercised, but if the majority of council members wish for the entire legislative text to be read, they can request that by a majority of 4.
Yeah, we've never had that happen that I can recall.
Yeah, I don't want it in there. That's kind of ridiculous in a way.
Ooh, what is the point of that? Really?
It's almost like a little city level
Filibuster.
Yeah.
filibuster, isn't it?
Okay. Well, we could put a note on that. I'm writing that down.
I mean, I guess.
Imagine if we had to read the entire full contract. So.
Right. Right. Well, the contract itself would be an attachment probably, but could be argued that it's part of the legislation. Anyway, I want to put a focus on that, and then I think it's worthy of reviewing these for consistency and to make I guess I shouldn't say to make sure, but to ensure that there's a comfort level from all council members in the events of an absence or a recusal, because some of these throughout our ordinances are drafted in hard numbers. That is X amount of city council members, not X amount of city council members at that meeting. So there's some not necessarily inconsistencies, but there's some well, they are inconsistencies, and the potential is there for no action due to an absence. And I don't know if that's the spirit of the purpose of some of those restrictions that require a majority or supermajority, 2/3, 3/4, etc.
And a lot of it, there's 4 out of 7 that's required, and I'm just glancing at this.
Yeah, and that one almost makes sense from a passage standpoint of 4 of 7, because 4 of 6 is still standing, 4 of 5 is still standing. The only time that would get weird is if there's only 4 council members at a meeting, and then it's like, well, where's the other 3? In other words, it's still a majority of all members, 4, unless there's happens to be only 4 people at a meeting, and then anyway,
Yeah.
I don't want to crystallize it too much.
Certainly in this section, all of them are of all council members, not
Yeah.
council members present.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll make a note of this.
Yeah, that sounds like a job for the attorney, not the ex-attorney. Sounds perfect. Speaking of absences, Rule 7 is excused absence. I was reading through this earlier. I didn't really see anything that I thought looked like it needed to be tweaked or updated or anything like that, but certainly anybody has anything different to say, please tell me.
No, I agree. I think it's at the exclusive discretion of the president of council to make a determination on whether an absence is excused or not. That being said, I think we're very, very considerate as to what we consider an excused absence, just out of respect that if there's something that is, there's a variety of obligations here or activities, et cetera, that, still call us away from time to time.
The only
No
thing
need-
I don't see in there, and I don't know if we have elsewhere, is there anything about if you have a number of unexcused absences, is that under, is there,
It's earlier in the
Yeah.
rules, I believe.
okay, I thought I saw that elsewhere. Um,
Yeah, that's what I was going to add. I have not had any issues with this. I don't know of any issues prior that of any council that I've taken part in. You know, we do try to be very understanding of the many facets of people's lives. But I do think that the chronic missing of meetings, absence of meetings up above can take care of things if necessary, but I don't see any need to change the language as is, in my opinion.
moving on to 7, vacancies. This is one of those where it definitely needs updated. And the very first sentence is, if there's a vacancy within 7 calendar days, it has to be noticed in a newspaper of general distribution. So this definitely needs updated. I don't even know if there is a newspaper in general distribution. Right. So that is going to need updated. I'm sure that we can all come to an agreement when we talk about details about electronic means and, which ways we want to put that posted on the city's website, email blast, social media, to use those modes of communication instead of newspaper of general distribution, which I think does not exist. Mayor Kearns, please.
Thank you. I really just want to flag this issue for the city attorney because I recall there's an inconsistency between this provision and something in either the charter or the code that actually I reviewed when Councilmember Hatzavatinos was ultimately appointed in that time frame. And I just can't put my finger on where that inconsistency is, but I think one of them says this, 7 days, and there was another one that said 2 weeks or something. So just to flag it.
I am making a note of that as well.
Mayor
Make a note
Kearns,
to update it.
based on your previous seat and your current seat, is the 45-day window sufficient and appropriate for that default action to go to the mayor?
I don't have any problem with it. I don't think it's inappropriate. Considering council meets every month, it ought to be time to convene.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I was just asking for feedback.
Okay. Moving on to 9. Any modifications or additions, deletions immediately noted? Director Kuzima, anything in this one that jumps out at you? I didn't see anything either. That one's pretty clear. 10, ethics law compliance. I mean, I think we should probably make sure everybody is still in compliance with ethics laws.
Let me
Rule 11 yeah, go ahead.
just ask you real quick. Right now, what do you guys receive any sort of notification in advance of the annual filing or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, second.
Are you getting that from OEC or from clerk?
Both.
Both. Okay. Okay, great. That takes care of my concerns.
Rule 11 to public comment. I think there's a lot that we could discuss under Rule 11. I will just jump right out there and say the first thing that I would like to discuss is I had the opportunity to attend several school board meetings in person even before the pandemic. And I this is probably not going to be a super popular opinion, but I do appreciate how the school board runs their meeting where you have a certain allotted time, you come to the podium, you say who you are, what you're addressing, you speak to the school board, and there's not a back and forth discussion. I'm not sure that I feel like city council meetings are the opportunity for people to have an open back and forth discussion with council members. We have items of business we need to get done. We're happy to listen to concerns. I know that I personally, and I am confident that all the rest of my members of council are more than happy to meet with residents and speak to them one-on-one at times outside of city council meetings to have those back and forth discussions by phone, by email, in person. I've done it myself in person back when you could meet with people in person. And I would be open to looking into modifying Rule 11 to make that a little bit clearer that, you know, the request for the floor is a request to more give a presentation and not to have a Q&A session
Yeah,
in an actual meeting.
it actually states that in there as exact text.
Right.
However, you know, in all of the years, there are occasions where individual council members may want a little bit more information, might want to give a response or some level of comment back, or ask a specific question because they're unclear about a position or a desire, or you know, to further clarify the comments that were given. So I do agree. This is, you know, a request for the floor is meant to be a request to address the president of council with any concern or public comment. But it's tough to say that no council member shall respond. It's a little bit discretionary, I think.
Well, that's what I want to talk about, because the school board, they just come right out and say, we don't respond. We are not going to ask you questions at this particular time. Like they flat out, they receive information only. And I would assume, and this is assuming, I've not asked specifically, if there's follow-up or more information needed or wanted on whatever subject was presented to them, my assumption would be that that is done outside of the meeting itself. And I'm not sure that that's a terrible idea. You can keep the agenda, keep meetings from getting too long. And if there's a particular subject that needs more information, or the particular council member wants more information from a community member or a presenter, that there can be follow-up outside of the meeting. It's just something I want to discuss.
If I may, I don't disagree with anything that's been said up to this point. I think the one section that probably creates maybe confusion is letter C,
Yeah.
which references length of debate. So there isn't intended to be debate. It's not, you know, the opportunity to actively participate. It's the opportunity to provide public comment. And it is primarily intended to be a one-way dialogue. But, you know, to the extent that you all discuss and want to have some ability to respond, or to allow someone to speak, not during those initial moments where public comment is taken, but rather, you know, later in the agenda at your discretion, you can do that. But again, I think maybe it's the wording and length of the debate that seems to be maybe a little misplaced, because then it goes on to say, no public comment or debate shall be permitted after the question has been put to the floor. But that's really intended to be as to the council discussion of an item. It's not intended to be the public's discussion of the council agenda.
Well, but then also D, questions from speakers. I mean, I think most people, when they ask a question, they're expecting an answer. And so, you know, I find then D is specifically permitting a question from speakers to the president of council. And so, like, I think we need to have a decision there. Like, if there's going to be any type of back and forth dialogue, maybe it comes from the president of council. I don't know. These are just things that are coming up as I'm.
So we just recently started in person over Zoom things again. We haven't had any public speakers yet, but it has been my intention to limit it to 3 minutes, letting people know ahead of time what the rules are, so that it doesn't come as a surprise and you're not interrupting people if unnecessary. The public comment form was created online to make it more uniform in how people request public comment. Before there was an actual form that you filled out in person. We now have a version of that form online so that people can fill it out so that it's very clear if you're asking for public comment or you're just emailing council. My solution that isn't really addressed in any of these rules here was to ask if there's any comments from council members to keep them to comments from council at the end of the agenda. That way it keeps the agenda moving. People are able to comment on it. It gives you some time to think about your answer as well. And assigning people to answer questions that, when applicable, if there's something that administration can answer or police or whatever it might be, making sure that someone follows up if needed.
Great. Any other discussion on 11?
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with everything that's been said, and I think it's the intent to keep it as you were saying, Rebecca. But I think over the years it's just gotten more and more informal. I mean, Anthony, you could probably speak to that more than any of the rest of us. But I think the intent is to have it as what we're advocating here, but it's just gotten more and more informal. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and there are occasions and there are topics and matters that really warrant extended comment coming from the public, whether an individual council member or council president or anyone else agrees with it, disagrees with it, etc. Sometimes it's very spirited, and there needs to be an allowance for that. So we have to be really delicate about rephrasing anything here, but also with the objective to be that we are making our best attempts to limit actual debate. The exception I was making is to seek clarity based upon comments, not to challenge the position of a public speaker.
I would also say too, our physical facilities are a little different than the schools. That I think makes it feel a little more informal and more like you're sitting at a table for a conversation as opposed to at a podium. So when we get our new administration and police and fire building, hopefully that'll help run things a little smoother in many ways.
I think that it might be worth considering or contemplating that because the request for the floor is, for public comment is directed at the president of council, or is intended to be directed at the president of council, perhaps there's an opportunity for a rule format that allows each or any interested council member to request permission from the president for additional comment or for additional clarity. And then that leaves the subjectiveness to the president to determine whether that's something that's appropriate at that time or whether it should be pursued outside of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, et cetera. Just an idea that way it kind of suspends the opportunity for direct conversation with the resident, but does allow for an opportunity to basically seek permission to interact and then go from there. These are kind of rare occasions, but I feel like if it's not there, it's a little bit unfair to the public as well.
I'm in favor of having just clearer rules around the whole thing, and so that the expectations are set. And maybe that's more of what I can say about the school board, that I like that, not that we necessarily have to do it exactly the same way, but that they just made it very, very clear at the beginning of the meeting exactly how this is going to work. And so if we are going to allow discourse, we say discourse at the discretion of the president, and he or she is allowed to determine how long that goes, all of those things. So those are good things that are ripe for discussion. In the interest of time, however, if everyone is comfortable, I would like to wrap things up here at Rule 11. We can finish off the last three at the next meeting and allow us enough time to log off, because we do have a new link for a regular council meeting, and maybe let everybody have a little breather and drink water or something in between both meetings.
Yeah, can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
it is possible to like create some guidelines or rules or whatever it might be and not putting it in the official rules. So that's easier to change. That's
Right. I
that
think
sort of
I was
thing.
thinking
So
the same thing too, that it would be on like your request to speak and they would just be delineated. I didn't necessarily mean that they
Yeah.
would be written into the council rules, but just.
yeah,
And
I mean, we
that,
could
you know,
create that now, but just not put it into the council rules so that it makes it, you know, a little easier for future councils to do what suits their needs.
Right, exactly. I agree 100%. Well, thank you everybody for this discussion. I move to adjourn.
Rebecca, when's our next rules meeting?
If we have mid-month, I might put it before mid-month, depending on how many other committees. I kind of felt bad that we stacked and packed tonight. I know that this is quite a burden on everybody. Most of us also have other jobs, and to start at 5:30 and be going to 8:30 is kind of a lot. So this is an ongoing process. So if we have a mid-month and there's not a bunch of committee meetings before it, I think we'll do that just to get it done. If not, same thing for April. If there's not a ton, then we'll probably do it. But of course, the last 3 shouldn't take very long. So I'll get it in probably.
No, I agree. There's not much remaining. I have a different topic involved in this, but I'll suspend until our next meeting.
Sounds great. All right. See you guys in a few.
Thank you.
Bye.